brought you a topic this week and you have no idea what it is.
Well, I know what the topic is. I know what the topic. It does sound familiar.
We've used something similar as a title, but I have a different interpretation on it. So the title for today is being intentional.
Yes.
And most of my stories come out of me being triggered in some way, and then I get to learn from it, right? So I figure if I can learn from it, other people can learn from it.
This is why we do these conversations, isn't it?
Yeah. So, I mean, other people can realize that they're not insane and they're going through the same shit that we're going through.
Or they are insane. No. I'm just joking because we're insane. But no. That's the point though, isn't it? That we're not alone and we often feel like everyone else has it going on and that we must be the only ones. So It is good to share.
Yeah. Yep. So you're definitely not alone. And I am definitely not alone in getting triggered. So this week, a couple of days ago, I gave my sister a call, FaceTime, whatever, with my kids, and we sang happy birthday to her. And my sister says, my birthday is tomorrow. And instead of, anyways, I'm trying to just carry on the conversation like nothing ever happened. And then Julie's like, I told you it was tomorrow. You've been telling me this for years, blah, 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 like making a huge deal out of it. And I'm so embarrassed. And I'm mad. And she keeps going and she's going. And it's a good thing that my daughter was there and I'm talking to her and my sister. And like we finished up the conversation and I'm still miffed. I am not a happy camper. And my wife knows it apparently, but she doesn't tell me that. And so I kind of went through my night and my overnight in this kind of pissed off place, but not knowing exactly how I want to deal with it. Because I know if I go in the moment and I go right back at her, and I almost said to her while we were talking, but like behind my daughter's head, like knock it off. But I didn't, but I would definitely want to go there. But in my stewing overnight and in my following morning, I started thinking about, okay, why is it so important that I talk to Julie about this? What is my result? Like, what ultimately do I want to achieve by having a conversation with her? Do I want to belittle her? Do I want to make her feel bad? Do I want to hurt her? Like, no, of course not. None of those things. So I got the idea of being intentional came to mind because I'm like, okay, so what's my intention for this conversation? Because I know I have to tell her. And I have a feeling this is going to be the topic for this week's conversation with you. So I'm like, I have to be able to
resolve it
here before I just air it there, right? Because, the internet shit comes around, right? It's out there forever. So I have to resolve it. And I definitely want to resolve it. So I'm like, okay, so I don't want to be hurtful. I guess my intention for the conversation is I want to share where I was. I want to share why I felt what I felt. And with the intention of us being able to grow from it. Me, myself, and her. So that something like that doesn't happen again. Because I was coming from a good place. I'm wishing my sister happy birthday, but after 44 years, you might think that I might remember my sister's birthday was the 7th and not the 6th. However, apparently it has shifted in my mind. So I had that conversation with her the following morning, and she's like, yeah, I knew you were pissed off. She goes, and I was waiting for you to like come back around and to tell me about it. But she says, she wasn't upset about it and she didn't feel bad about it and nor should she. And I think part of the reason why I was kind of miffed about the whole thing was because that's the kind of thing I do. Like, I'm the guy who exaggerates and makes something bigger than it is to try to make light of a situation. But in that case, I was the butt of the joke.
Ah, yes. Yes, we commonly call that over here in Australia shit stirring.
Yeah, stir the pot. Yeah, we use that too, sort of. Yeah.
Okay, and so yes, usually the person that's
my own pot. Yeah, I think I might own one. I might sell them too, actually. Kind of into it.
which usually the person that's on the receiving end of the stirring of the wooden spoon is not particularly receiving it as well as it's being thrown at them. Admittedly, that's the whole definition of it. Yes.
Yeah, I was definitely the butt of the joke. But the key to this for me is knowing why you go into any given conversation. And I think that's the emphasis that I wanted to put on this, was knowing the outcome that I wanted to have, being super clear on what I wanted that space to look like, what I wanted to feel like, what I want the understanding to be. And in doing so, I think you create a container to have a conversation that has the possibility for greater success than if you went into it unconsciously and using some old adaptive behaviors to kind of whatever, cover things up or make sure that they understand, make sure that they get it so they don't do it again. Like, that's not the point, right?
Yep.
At least it wasn't the point the next day. The night of, if I had gone there, which I guarantee in some past life, I definitely would have done. I definitely would have flown off the handle, been angry, and made sure that she understood what she did wrong in that circumstance. You know what I mean? Like, that's not who I am anymore. Not who I want to be anymore.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the key things. I know we're going to pull this apart a little bit, but who we don't want to be, that sometimes we do get in our own way and we do fall into the reaction. I know I do. I don't know if I'm in every circumstance where this kind of thing happens, where I'm completely evolved and don't do reactions.
What my wife did say, though, that morning, that I was appreciative of, is that she recognized that not everybody would do that. That it takes a certain kind of person to be able to recognize it and to share it, and not be attached to, I guess, having the humility to come and to share what was going on.
Yeah, it certainly, yes, it shows a bit of strength of character and a bit of observation and insight and all of those things. Yeah, it does completely. Yeah. Yep.
So do you relate?
I do. Like I just shared. Not sure that I've quite evolved in every circumstance that allows me to not react and be really, I call it being passionate about my feelings. And really it's about that, getting off my chest everything I feel about it. And by doing that, I blame everything or everyone or the circumstance or the whatever outside of me. And then when I've been able to do that, I then can take that breath. Now, when I'm being good, I take the breath first and then really look at what my reactions are. But I can so get caught up in the moment. I did have something this week that I forgot to be intentionally being intentional. Yeah, I forgot to be being intentional.
So you are human.
Yeah, that. And in actual fact, I found myself so passionate about what I wanted to say and how I felt that I ended up being in tears in conversation with my sister. And I mean, after I didn't end the conversation in tears, but it's such a like, that wasn't the intention that I had for that conversation, and it wasn't even her intention. She'd rung up to see if I'd sign a document to help speed up a process. So, you know, and then I wanted to know the background of why I would need to sign that document, and then we got into it, like, and there was all these emotions and, well, why, and well, what else is going on, and if you're saying that, well, then what else is there? And we kind of just dug ourselves into a hole that was really quite deep. And then to try and get out of that was challenging, because not only as you're trying to dig out of it, you've got all the history that's also part of the digging out of that. And then if you're already in emotional reactiveness, it can be really difficult to kind of wade through the muck. I did wade through the muck, and so did she. 24 hours later, there was a lovely conversation that occurred that there had been some follow-up done and some information gained. And she then sent me a lovely message yesterday and went, I really appreciate you. And so we did work through that. But there's an element for me just from those 3 days ago where there's a bit of regret around having, like, forcing my emotion onto her, because is that really fair?
But are you forcing it on her? I mean, you're allowed to feel your emotions that you feel. That you just have to own them.
Yeah, and I think that is sometimes there can be a little bit of a grey area around having permission to feel the emotions, and then in the expression of that, if you're okay, I'm going to speak about what I was like when I'm in the midst of emotional expression. I don't know that I'm owning them. I'm kind of offloading them, and I'd have to have blame in there. Now I say that like I'm not, like I can't remember whether I had blame or not, and it's because when I get emotional, it overtakes and it removes my rational observational capacity, where if I can, in whatever way, remove those emotions a little, soften them, that's when I can start to own them. And that's what I was able to do 24 hours later.
I think it's difficult when you get triggered in the moment, you kind of go into a place where you're no longer present, and you can be very reactive, right? You often talk about being reacting versus responding. And sometimes in the heat of the moment, you go there. I think where the growth happens is in what I call the recovery conversation. Because I've had time to process, I've had time to understand and kind of deconstruct my own, why was I upset? Okay, sure, I was embarrassed. Like I was made of maybe look like a fool. My ego's getting in my way, like all that stuff. I was able to kind of pick it apart and then realize, okay, that's my stuff, not her stuff. I probably would have done something similar if she was on the other foot. So how can I be mad at her for doing me? Like,
being the behavior that you express.
So in owning that those emotions were true and upsetting the night before, I was able to show up in the recovery conversation with the right mindset and intention for that conversation, so that we could have a growth dialogue, as opposed to like rehashing the story and making it worse.
Yes, and so I did experience something similar, in that I had to recognize that I see situations in a particular way because of my experience of it. It doesn't make it true for the other person. So, and it was such a, I mean, one of the things I find is that it's usually over something really silly, like something that's not really that big of a deal. So for me, it was that I'd been the third person 5 days later that had been contacted, and everybody else had been contacted before me. How very dare that happen? Which on reflection is ridiculous, because...
So I'm curious, what meaning did you give that?
Oh, that I was rejected and my opinion didn't matter, and I was no longer relevant. I jumped there very quickly.
Right, but that's what our old wounds do to us, right?
Correct. And it was not relevant to the actual reality of the circumstance, but it's what I made it out to be.
Yeah, like calling my sister 8 hours too soon, whatever, like that's the big deal. That's what I'm upset about. No, I'm not. I was embarrassed.
Yeah.
I felt like a fool, and that's not her
Yeah,
problem.
and in actual fact, it was purely that there were other things that had gone on and coincidental timings had occurred. So one of the other people that had been in the know before I was happened to have picked up their phone and called, rather than me, who I hadn't picked up my phone and called anyone to say, hi, how are you? Someone else had done that. So they found out the information. They were asked the question. I quite honestly had a couple of busy days, so I may not have even picked up the phone anyway if somebody had rung me. And in fact, I'd got the message the day before. She sent me a message on the night before and said, oh, Chris, I would just want to ask you a question. Just let me know is a good time to talk to you about that. And I went, oh, look, 10:30 tomorrow would be good, because I had a client that evening and I wasn't going to go there. But like, I delayed it. And then suddenly it was all her fault. This is why I go, I know that in the moment I gave the blame, regardless of how valid my emotions and feelings were, because they were valid-ish. They sort of were valid, but not completely in the way that I expressed them. But the recovery, I do like the idea of the recovery conversation. And I do have a mindset, and I've had this since I can remember. And I remember I used to apply it to work days. I would have not a good work day when I'd have a job, right? And something would go wrong and I'd beat myself up about it and whatever. And then how am I going to speak to that person tomorrow? Because I have to walk back into that workplace and that's going to be really awkward, and always worried about what people thought about what I said or did. And then I would wake up the following day and I go, you know what? It's a new day. It's a new day. I don't have to behave in that same way today. So what is it that I could do differently? Now, I don't know that my mindset was that articulated 30 years ago, but I still had that intention in me. And so I have developed that over the years. So the following day when I saw a message come through from her, I rang her straight away, because then that was a different behavior. And immediately, because I didn't palm her off. And I also, the other thing that I did intentionally was the day before, I'd actually allowed about an hour and a half window. I'd actually sent an intention to go, oh, this call's going to go on forever. Where the recovery conversation I deliberately made between leaving the gym and getting home. So I had a definitive amount of time, and therefore got to the point, I was succinct. We didn't have another hour and a half to delve into all of the repeat of the day before. So that was something that I noticed I did, was change the parameters.
Yeah. That's good.
In that recovery conversation. But yeah, mindset and changing my parameters of what that can now look like.
Yeah, you changed the approach to the conversation, but you also had time to process between conversation 1 and conversation 2. Like, where did I go? What did I make it mean? Is there any validity to that? Do I need to ask follow-up questions? It's almost like you're able to extract out the emotional side of things with the facts of what happened, and then be able to ask clarifying questions that are outside of the emotional bubble that you got yourself into.
Yeah, exactly. And recognizing not only that the other people that had also been involved, that I could put some clear definition around what their real involvement was, rather than my assumed emotional reaction to their involvement.
Good word, assumed.
And by doing that, that allowed me to feel more comfortable about what my place was in this whole discussion.
Mm-hmm.
And now that that's been clarified, moving forward, I now know that I may be, my husband actually was really good at highlighting what maybe why I was asked 5 days later. He's articulated to me that he said, maybe she was just gaining information from everybody and you're the final one to ask because you're going to give her some level-headed response. So she's just gathering information, but you're the one that's going to help guide her to give her the
Did you get
finality
on if that was the case, or did that matter?
It didn't matter specifically. It was that he allowed a different option, which stopped the assumptions.
Mm-hmm.
And therefore, his theory may not be true. However, it allowed me to open up to a different possibility. So instead of running on one possibility, I now had two.
I really like that. It reminds me of, I don't know if you've ever watched the show Big Bang Theory or not.
Yes.
Okay. So
I don't know if there's anyone on the planet who hasn't, but
yes,
I definitely
it's my
have.
favorite show, and I still watch it on reruns like crazy. So, but there's an episode where Howard finds out there's a letter from his father that they find, and he doesn't know what's in it, but somebody read it beforehand, and in the last scene, I think. So they don't tell him what the real letter says exactly, but each person gave their version of what that letter said. And then so he got to choose which one was the real story. And some you could obviously pick out were fake, but there was a piece of all of them that worked for him. So having the alternate options allowed him to enjoy the process as opposed to being stuck with, my dad's an asshole, he left me, whatever. So it was a similar example, but it opens up your mind and frees your mind from the catastrophization of where our mind often goes.
Yeah, so the simple way to do that for ourselves is to always have the words "what if" as an option. Again, I don't know that when I'm caught up in the emotion and the reaction that I remember to do a what if, because
however, if you're able to catch yourself at some point down the spiral, at some point, you're able to bring yourself back. So yes. You might not catch yourself in the conversation going crazy or being nuts, but you might notice it a few minutes sooner, or a few days sooner, or a few hours sooner, so that you can eventually back yourself up and try to be as present and as available in your conversations as possible without going down the assumption hole.
Yep, totally. I'm curious with your situation. One of the things that jumped out to me was that even though it was about your sister, you had more of a reaction to your wife. And I was curious about that. What was your sister's response to you being a day early, apart from her highlighting that you were a day early?
I tuned out the moment Julie went on her little mini rant.
Okay.
And then my daughter probably took over the conversation to talk about her nails or something. So I wasn't present anymore. I was out of my mind.
So when you did the recovery conversation with Julie, what was your insight about that? Like where your attention had gone and what was in there? Because it's interesting that it got kind of projected onto Julie.
Oh, of course, it's got to be somebody else's fault. It's not my fault in the moment, right? But that's my ego, right? I allowed my ego to get in the way, and I completely tuned out. And the only thing I could think about was how do I save face was probably the first thing that came up. Like I could have easily said, "Oh, it's not the 7th. It's not today. Like we're not the 7th today." Like I probably could have done something like that, but that ship had sailed a few seconds into Julie's commentary. Anyway, so I think I zoned out, and I think I allowed my daughter to take over for a little bit until I was able to bring myself back enough to talk with my sister. But yeah, I was not there anymore.
Yeah, yeah.
Triggers do that.
So, is Julie still going to stir you when you get these things wrong moving forward?
I think she thought it was hilarious, the fact that it's what I would do.
Well, yes, because I'm encouraging of that option. I'm thinking that's good.
It's the irony, right?
Yeah. And if she gets to do that again, like when she chooses to do that again,
oh, she's going to do it for sure. She should. Yeah, she should do it again.
Oh yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Then that way you can kind of see whether you've grown through that yet or not.
Well, I think that's the beauty of this, right? Like there's an opportunity for me to catch myself sooner, right? So to either not take myself so seriously or whatever. You make mistakes all the time, and of all the mistakes to make, calling somebody a few hours early is not the worst one.
No, it's not really life-changing.
Now my sister here, reframing is so good with coaching. I love reframing. So now my sister gets to celebrate her birthday twice. She got to celebrate it with us on the 6th and with everybody else who remembered her birthday on the 7th, and whoever forgot on whatever day that they decided to call her. So yeah, it's all good.
Yes, so that's a bonus for her. That's right. But yeah, it is interesting how we make things much bigger than they need to be. But I do really like your being intentional for the recovery conversation, really what outcome you wanted ultimately, rather than just getting out of the way. And I applied that with my sister. Ultimately, my intention is to be there for her in a little bit more reliable state that she copped a few days ago. And so now I need to make sure that those parameters are in place for me so that I can stop myself from necessarily going down a reactive path. Because for me, siblings are a really decent trigger.
Yeah.
And someone else said to me, oh, that means you're not over all of, you've obviously got some deep wounds you haven't dealt with yet. And I actually went, yeah, probably. Do I have to have them all dealt with yet? Like you said, the gift. Now I've had something else be revealed. I will work through that over the next few weeks. And I might do it sooner, I might take longer, I don't know. But it's now risen to the surface. So now that I'm aware that that's still a thing, there's already movement going on, because that's how it works. So there was a gift in that conversation.
For sure. And if you can look at any challenging situation for you as a stepping stone to a better version of yourself, well, then there's no bad experiences. Some uncomfortable ones, but no bad experiences. They all have value if you allow them to be so. Yes.
Well, that was an interesting... I had no clue where you were going to go with the being intentional, but and I didn't even know what story I was bringing for this. I had no clue. Wow, isn't that amazing?
There's always a thread that can be woven between what's going on in your life and my life and whoever else's life who is paying attention right now. So yeah.
Totally. I think that's actually the key here, is that we all actually have all of these events are going on constantly in our lives. We just forget to pay attention to what that little piece is, and we can brush over it.
And that's the other thing. So I think it would have been just as easy for me if I was unconscious about this to have just been pissed off about it and let it simmer under the surface. And then the next stupid thing that happens, blow up over it, over doing dishes or whatever the case may be, right? So having that kind of release of pressure valve, you know, helps. And
Yep.
me having the conversation the next day was enough of a release for me to understand myself better, for her to understand where I was, and for us to have a better relationship because we're having those conversations as opposed to just ignoring it or letting it go or whatever.
Yeah. And I'm a definitely vote for Julie to stir you as often as possible on that. Just saying.
And on that note, I think we'll end it. Pot stirrer.